a long history of polarization. Welcome to this Columbus on the Record special. No doubt we are in a period of deep political polarization that threatens our democracy. As part of our Democracy in Crisis series with the Columbus Metropolitan Club, I spoke with the New Republic editor, Michael Tomasky. We traced the roots of our polarization. Here is that conversation.
At the start of the pandemic, if you remember back into March of 2020, I was reading two books. One was The Great Influenza, which really documents the 1918 flu. And also Philip Roth's The Plot Against America, which talks about an authoritarian ruler taking over the United States in 1940. I was having trouble sleeping during that spring. I read your book last month, and a similar feeling overcame me.
Didn't help.
And slept in my sleep. So we'll get into that, and hopefully we'll all be able to sleep a little bit better after this discussion. But
I wouldn't count on it.
You know, we as Americans, maybe as human beings, think everything is brand new. This has never, ever happened before. Either that, or like in 1918, we forget the lessons we should have learned from something like the influenza and move on with our lives. We are certainly polarized right now, very polarized. We all would agree on that. But we have been here before. In fact, you argue we have always been this way.
Pretty much. The book came out in early 2019, and I did, a number of events for the book, and I had a sort of standard little talk, which always started something like this. People think we've been polarized since the 90s, and they're right, the 1790s. Yes, people chuckled nervously then, too. And so that's, Mike, where the book starts and how it opens. And it's really true. And yes, it's gotten worse since the 1990s. We all know that. Many of us have lived through that. But the roots of the two Americas that are today at loggerheads, nay, war with each other, go back to the beginning of the Republic. The shorthand labels for these groups at the time were the Jeffersonians versus the Hamiltonians, Jeffersonians versus Hamiltonians, or the Democratic Republican Party of Jefferson versus the Federalist Party of Hamilton. They don't map exactly onto today's Republican and Democratic parties, but certain traits do certainly stand out. The Jeffersonians were the yeoman farmers, the rural people, the infantrymen in the Continental Army, and the people who, like rural people today, were suspicious of a large federal government, suspicious of central power, didn't like taxes very much. The Federalist Hamiltonians were the city slickers. The people who believed in manufacturing, the educated elites, the officers in the Continental Army, the members of the High Episcopal Church, the quote-unquote classier denominations. And so these divides existed then and have existed in many ways ever since. And the divisions were deep in the 1790s and into the early 1800s, and they disagreed about everything. They disagreed about first of all, many of them disagreed about whether independence was desirable. There were Federalists, as I said, but there were anti-Federalists too. The Federalists, of course, wrote the Federalist Papers, agitated for ratification of the Constitution. The anti-Federalists agitated against ratification of the Constitution and made some pretty prescient arguments, actually. I read a lot of their pamphlets, and they said things like, "Look, this is impossible. This is too big and too varied and too diverse a place to be turned into one country. We just disagree about too much." The argument for republic held the day because the vast majority of them took the consensus that to break away from England and to form our own country, the 13 colonies needed to form a united front. And Independence was the first priority. Slavery, a lot of them didn't like, but we'd settle that question later. Well, that question only got settled, of course, at the barrel of a gun some decades later. Anyway, that's how it started, and that's kind of how it's been.
You're right that the founders were human. They made lots of mistakes in how they set up this government and this republic. Is there any one mistake that they made that you think is costing us the most right now?
The Senate. So when we were in school, we were taught that the Senate was the result of what was known by two names: the Connecticut Compromise, because it was crafted by Roger Sherman of Connecticut, chiefly, others as well, but chiefly Sherman. And then it's also called the Great Compromise, right? We learned that in school. So what is that phrase, the Great Compromise, supposed to tell us, supposed to make us think? It's supposed to make us think that it was great and that everybody was pleased by it, and that you know, it ended some debate, and everybody shook hands and hugged and drank champagne and was happy. Nobody was happy. Nobody was happy. The Connecticut Compromise passed at the Constitutional Convention. I believe the vote was 5-4 to 2 abstentions. So it passed by one. The states, and this is another question. This, you want to talk about beginning weird questions like why? Why did each of the 13 states have an equal vote at the Constitutional Convention when they were so different in population? That's a weird one too. But anyway, 5-4 to 2. New York was absent that day, and there's this long-running debate among constitutional scholars about how New York might have voted, so the whole thing might have failed if New York had shown up. A lot of these guys, there were 55 guys, and you know, they couldn't be there the whole time. It went from June to September of 1787, and they had to get back to tend their crops and whatever they had to do, and they'd go back and forth between their home states and Philadelphia. The day after it passed, the 4 states that voted against it met that morning and said, what are we going to do about this? This is a disaster. This is insane to have, you know, Virginia and Rhode Island both have 2 senators. This is crazy. At the time, Virginia was the most populous. I believe Rhode Island was the least populous, and Virginia had 14 times the number of citizens that Rhode Island had. Today, California has 70 times the number of citizens that Wyoming has. So a Wyomingan has 70 times the voting power in the Senate that a Californian does. So they were aware that this was a problem. This wasn't a great compromise. This was a lousy compromise.
What was their reasoning? Why the advocates for this system? Was it based in maintaining slavery? Was it the southern colonies that wanted to make sure they had enough votes to maintain it?
Yeah, it was partly slavery, and it was partly the small states, you know, is the small states, you know, saying, you know, big states are going to overrun us, and that was an argument that held a lot of sway, and it still holds a lot of sway, you know. In any state with big cities and rural areas, the rural people complain that the big city is going to overrun us, and I'm sure that happens here.
What makes our polarization now different than what we've experienced before?
Well, that is a great question. Let me look at this, answer this in 2 ways. The first in terms of Congress and our politics, and the second just in terms of the broader country and our culture. In Congress, there's very little effort to compromise anymore. And this has happened since the 60s, and it's happened for a variety of reasons. As the country grew, different regions that had different interests had to make alliances with the already existing portions of the country, and this made for parties that were a real ideological mishmash. So the Republicans were Yankee, you know, moderates from the New England states, Free Soilers from Ohio and Wisconsin, and then agrarians from the Midwest, and so on. All of them kind of different. The Democratic Party was even worse. The Democratic Party was the party of the urban machines of the North, the party of Boss Tweed, and the apartheid, racist, segregationist party of the South, who disagreed about most things, but for some reason they stayed in the same party to win elections, to win presidential elections. So, you know, as a result, through the mid-20th century, the Democratic and Republican parties had a ton of overlap. And the National Journal, the publication based in Washington, used to do this every year. I think they've stopped bothering because there's no point anymore, but they used to measure this overlap and how many liberal Republicans were there and how many conservative Democrats were there, and there were always 15, 18, 22 senators in this overlap area. That stopped happening in about 2010, and now there's no overlap. So even Joe Manchin is more liberal than the most liberal Republican senator. And I forget who the most liberal Republican senator is. It's probably Mitt Romney, I guess, or some, you know. But he's more conservative than Joe Manchin. So there's zero overlap. And there's zero overlap even in the House of Representatives now, 435 people. So that's one thing that's happened. And then more broadly, I would say just our politics has become so cultural and so consuming about everything we do. You know, do you shop at Whole Foods? You're probably a Democrat. Do you drive a Volvo? You're probably a Democrat. Do you drive a Ford F-150? You're probably a Republican. And so on and so on. And just what TV shows you watch, what teams you cheer for, what sports you're interested in. It's all now infused through some kind of political sieve that you know, heightens divisions.
Can you blame either party? In your book, you take aim at Republicans because they've really become much more unified and ideological, where the Democrats are still more of a coalition, disorganized, as Will Rogers would say. Yeah. Can you blame either Democrats or Republicans? Do they share the blame? Does one get more blame?
No, the Republicans do get more blame in my eyes, and it goes back to, you know, Gingrich was, I think, the first actor here, and you know, he explicitly said that he wanted to heighten the distinctions and make Washington more partisan. There's a famous quote from him that's in the book. I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, a reporter asked him why he never served in Vietnam. He got a deferment, of course. He said, I guess I felt that I had a different war to fight here at home. War, okay? He used the war metaphor in talking about members of a different political party. This was really different. Remember, at the time, Washington, not only was there all this overlap, but it was run by men, mostly men then, and today still, but mostly men then, almost wholly men, who came of age in the Depression and during World War II, two events that really made the country kind of pull together and made for a more communal ethos that extended into the post-war era. And if you look at the great senators and House leaders and presidents too of the 50s and 60s, they all lived through both of those experiences, and they knew that hardship. I mean, one story that I love that I tell in the book is that, you know, Bob Dole, and a Republican senator from Kansas, and two Democratic senators, Phil Hart of Michigan and Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, convalesced after the war, recovering from their injuries in the same hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan. And when you get to know somebody like that, you don't use war metaphors against them, you know.
On the Republican Revolution, Newt Gingrich, that was a response to some of the war on poverty, to use the term war, from Lyndon Johnson. Some of those programs were very good: Medicare, Medicaid, public housing, not so good. Do Democrats bear some responsibility there? Because they did control the branches of government for a long time, in the time leading up to the 1990s.
Yeah, they bear some responsibility, and you know, they ran the show in the 60s and 70s, and they didn't do everything right. I would argue that if you look at the statistics and the Great Society programs, they really did reduce poverty dramatically. Elderly poverty in particular went way, way down after the passage of Medicare. Child poverty went way, way down after the passage of Medicaid. So I would defend those programs. But then there were failures. And, the welfare state became sclerotic, and there were problems, big problems with welfare policy. And then crime was a big problem that the Democrats didn't seem to respond to. So those were the roots of the backlash. But I think the backlash also contained, it came from the Roe decision and the politicization of the Southern Baptist Church, which up to that point had been pretty resolutely non-political. So yeah, it takes two to tango.
We'll pick on the media in a moment, but and we like to pick on politicians as well, but you're right that politics is a lagging indicator, that politicians follow the people. So how does that square with what you're saying about how the system has not worked, but we the people, to coin a phrase, put that system in place?
Yeah, we did. And I think when I write that, what I mean is that, politicians, they wait to see what people think. There's the famous quote from the French politician of the mid-19th century, "There go my people. I must find out where they are going so I can lead them." Politicians generally follow. But, there was, I would also say, starting in the 70s, a very concerted effort among American conservatives to invest millions and millions and millions of dollars in politics in a way they hadn't before. You all know how many billions corporations spend on lobbying now. They didn't do that in the 1960s and 70s. They just didn't do it. It didn't occur to them. The conservative establishment, and we know today the Kochs and the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute and all these things, didn't exist. So all that was a conscious effort begun in 1971 to change the political dynamic, and they've been pretty successful.
Turning back to the media and conservative media, I remember when they put Rush Limbaugh on the radio station where I worked in central Massachusetts at the time, and Mike Dukakis was losing or had just lost, and it was really a shock to the system, but he saved AM radio, became very popular. Fox News, of course, soon followed. We don't just have one or two channels anymore. We have hundreds, thousands, plus feeds on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah. How has that led to our polarization?
Well, obviously people get the news they want, and they listen to the sources they want. And liberals mostly watch MSNBC and CNN and read the New York Times and follow Twitter feeds that they want to follow. And conservatives read Fox or watch Fox and Newsmax and One America and listen to Sinclair radio stations and local broadcast stations and read Facebook feeds that they want to read. I saw, some of you may have seen shortly after the Mueller report came out, an interview with a woman who only watched Fox, and she had no idea that there was a single critical sentence in the Mueller report about Donald Trump. She just didn't know that it was there. So, and if you compare MSNBC and CNN on the one hand, which do basically the same kind of thing, MSNBC more avowedly liberal in prime time, and compare what they present to what Fox presents. They're different worlds. It's not just like there's this fact and we disagree about it. There's two whole different fact sets.
We have, in our new newsroom, we have many more TVs than we had before. We have CNN and Fox right next to each other. It is two different worlds. I used to watch Fox, but not all day. Like I can monitor it all day like now, and it's a very, I don't want to use the word dystopian, but Fox has a dystopian view of the world right now. We're getting invaded. Biden, gas prices go up, but they never come down.
Yeah.
CNN, more down the middle.
Yeah.
How do you get folks to watch the other, to see what their neighbor is listening to? How do you get a Fox viewer to watch MSNBC? How do you get an MSNBC viewer to watch Fox? Can you?
I don't know if you can. I mean, let's not forget, still in this country, I'm sure many of you have good, close friends who are from the other political party, and you either don't talk about politics or you kind of talk about it, but you talk about it gingerly and politely. I, too, have some Republican conservative friends, particularly from my hometown, Morgantown, West Virginia, guys I went to high school with and stuff. And, we still have points of commonality. We love our Mountaineers, and, we have our shared memories and
Is that
stuff.
part of the problem that we avoid? We have friends who we know we disagree with, family members we
Yeah.
know we disagree with, but we don't want to ruin the Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
Is that a contributing factor as well?
Yeah, it probably is, but, do you want to ruin your Thanksgiving dinner?
No. But, we just avoid, we Midwesterners are great at avoiding things, but
Yeah.
we avoid anything that could cause trouble as a human being.
Yeah.
Let's get to some of these solutions. If you could change one thing today, again, back to the one mistake that the founders made, if you could change one thing today you think would help close this gap, what would it be?
Well, it's hard to limit it to one thing, so I'm going to cheat and give more than one thing. But the first thing is I would just get rid of the United States Senate. Thank you. I'm glad to see that got some applause, not for my sake, but for the sake of the idea. John Dingell wrote a cover story, the congressman from Michigan the late congressman from Michigan wrote a cover story in the Atlantic magazine a couple years ago, Abolish the Senate. It doesn't serve any good purpose. Most other countries have unicameral legislatures. England, okay, has its House of Lords, but what year did they pass the Reform Act that defanged the House of Lords and made it largely ceremonial? Anybody know? Some of you know, I'm sure. 1909, okay? So more than a century ago, they realized this doesn't work, a Senate. Another thing I'd do, Mike, is and this is probably not going to get applause, expand the size of the House of Representatives. No one? No takers? Okay.
Those are the folks running for Congress who want to run for Congress.
We have 435 for a country of 330 million. England, what is it, 90 million people? You know how many people are in the House of Commons? 600 and something.
Wow.
I did a study while I was researching the book. I just went from country to country. How large are the constituencies of each of these parliaments? And they tend to be in the neighborhood of 100,000 to 130,000 constituents. Our members of Congress represent 750,000 people. That's not tenable. That's not close to the ground democracy. Now, if you prorated it out and made it 130,000, we'd have 3,000 people in the House of Representatives. I don't think we quite want to do that. But I think we should think about ways to expand the size of the House of Representatives. And there are people thinking about this. And not only expand the size, but change the way some of them are elected. Single-member districts are bad. There's a lot of talk about multi-member districts and ranked choice voting. These are things that also might, over time, produce more moderate winners. Ranked choice voting, for example, because if you're not the voter's number one choice, you have to work to kind of try to be their number two choice.
Those changes would require constitutional amendments, which is very difficult. One change would not be that difficult, in theory. In the United States Senate, they equate going to a simple majority vote to nuclear Armageddon. And that's because of the filibuster. What should be done with the filibuster?
Yeah, I'm against the filibuster. I have been for a long time. First of all, it just violates a basic principle of what we are taught from the time we're little kids is fair play, is that the majority rules, right? Majority rules. If 9 friends are together and they're voting on something and the vote comes 5-4 in favor of a certain outcome, nobody disputes that outcome carries the day. But that's not how the United States Senate works at all. In the United States Senate, to extend the analogy, it would take 7 maybe of the 9 to make sure that something passes, giving 3 the effective right of the majority. And that's how the Senate works. 41 people are effectively the majority in the United States Senate, because 41 people can block anything.
Michael, let's do the end run scenario. How do we get out of this? Give us your best case scenario and your worst case scenario.
Republicans may be peeling away from Donald Trump to some extent. Now, if they nominate someone else, I think at least that person, if he loses, will abide by the result. So I think. I think.
Small victories, I guess.
The worst case scenario is very clear, right? It's that Trump runs, is the nominee in 2024, loses, by 8 million popular votes, 10 million popular votes, but narrowly enough in 5 states that he can contest it, and that this time he succeeds and overturns it. So then, how much of a democracy are we if that happens? And then he gets into office. In January 2017, he didn't know the structure of the federal government. He didn't know where the weak points were. Now he knows. What's he going to do with his power this time?
Plenty to think about. That is Columbus on the Record. I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.